Hoi hoi, evening, and welcome to what is it 37? Have I counted? I think I've counted it right. Episode 37 of Shelf Analysis, and the final episode of Shelf Analysis before a brief summer break. I say a brief summer break, I'm off for a few weeks, which is very nice. But immediately, once we get back, then the show will be back on again in September. Episode 37 is my first thought. I was sitting here for the last 3 minutes. You sit here, there's a countdown, and you wait for the countdown to go to zero before you start saying the words out loud. And my immediate thought was, this is episode 37. And again, if you go back and have a look through all of the episodes that we've done, maybe the first one, two, three, four, they're a bit rough around the edges. I like to think things have gotten a bit better since then. I mean, I got a proper camera a while back, which means you can actually see me, despite the fact that the light levels are pretty much the same as the night I interviewed John Irving, and it looked like I was in a cave. The 37 episodes have been a quite extraordinary thing in the middle of something equally extraordinary, but for very different reasons. I say that because, in case you don't know the history about this, very briefly, I started doing Shelf Analysis when lockdown began. There were a lot of authors who were having events that were coming up. They were going to be involved in things that weren't going to happen, launches, publicity for books that then may or may not be coming out or might have been bumped out for a few weeks or for a couple of months. And I decided I'd try this. And all of a sudden, it became a thing. And it started rolling, and I started asking people I knew, which was great, and authors that I'd interviewed before, and they were happy to do it, mainly because they were locked at home like the rest of us and didn't have much else to do. And we got around things like time zones, and we interviewed authors in the US, and we interviewed. In fact, go back and have a look at the Douglas Kennedy one, where it came within the hair's breadth of not having a program, which is how this works in terms of live broadcast. And then we did one in Europe, and we've done a bunch of them with friends in the UK as well. And I think everybody has said yes. Everybody who I asked, which is just the loveliest thing imaginable. And you get to talk to people not just about their books, which is nice, but about the things that they think you should be reading. And I think we've created our own enormous reading lists from those things that have been recommended over the course of the 37 shows or so. Today is also the 6th birthday of the Ricochet Book Club. I know. 6 years ago today, I finally gave in to the pressure of people who had been saying to me, would you not consider having meetups or doing some sort of physical real world thing? I know some of you know the story already. And I said, no, don't be silly. I'm terrible with people. Let's do something on the internet. Fully presuming that a few hundred people would decide to pop in and we'd all end up just noodling away and talking about books. I think we're at about 33,000 odd people in 60, 70 different countries. Hello to you if you're listening, watching this somewhere else around the world. And I always get things back from people who are going, yeah, well, we were watching in South Africa last week, so hello to you. And I hope you've enjoyed the last 6 years of what has been the weirdest hobby that I've ever had. And I hope you enjoy it as we continue on and move forward. 6 years is a long time. And thanks to everybody who was so lovely and made mention of that today. Our guest tonight is wonderfully somebody I've wanted to talk to for quite some time. I'm going to get to him in a minute. There's always bits and pieces that need to be dealt with first. So firstly, let me get caught up in my own wires and start by seeing what I got going on here. Firstly, I did say I would mention this from my friends at Penguin. They sent me over this today. So you know Colm O'Regan probably quite well, the comedian. This is his third and divine book called Handle with Care. And Colm is giving you the option to call into your book club. So a lot of book clubs not necessarily physically meeting these days. They're meeting through Zoom. Colm is giving you the option to pop into because lots of authors are just doing that these days. They're just showing up in your Zoom book club. If you'd like to have a chat with Colm, if you've read any of the Andivine books in your book club, are going to be doing it. The email address is there at the bottom. It's ldermody@penguinrandomhouse.ie. Don't send it to penguinrandomhouse.ie. They're a completely different company. ldermody@penguinrandomhouse.ie. There's a post about this up in the book club as well, if you're interested. And you could have Colm on your book club and zooming in. Okay, next thing is this. Because I'm finished this coming Friday for a few weeks. Finished on the radio and finished doing this as well, obviously. So this is the pile. This is the pile that's going away on holidays with me. It is subject to change, and I always bring away slightly more than I can get to read. This year, of course, I have the joy of not having to worry about weight restrictions on a plane. So these are all going into the boot of the car for the trip. Donal Ryan's new one is up there at the top, Strange Flowers, which I've kind of been holding onto for holidays, and I've had for a while, and I haven't really read because I wanted to bring it away with me. Hannah Fry's Hello World is in there. I bought that forever ago. You might know Hannah Fry from her TV shows that she does for the BBC on science. Darren Anderson's wonderful Inventory, A River, a City, a Family, about growing up in Derry. Again, I've been holding on to that until I can find an opportunity to do it. I always bring away at least one science fiction book with me. Lee Brackett's The Long Tomorrow I bought 4 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe even before this book club began. And finally, I'm getting around to it. I've been threatening to do it for a really long time. The new Kevin Barry short story collection is there as well, That Old Country Music. Nora Ephron's Heartburn, which I bought ages ago, never got around to it. I mentioned Kelly Khalifa's Debt is Hard Work a while back because I bought it on my first trip back to an actual bookshop. It's set in Syria and to do with a family whose father dies, and his dying wishes that he is buried in the family plot, which is halfway across war-torn Syria. John Connell's brand new book, you may have read The Cow Book of it 2 years ago. It was hugely successful. It won Bord Gáis Energy Book Awards at the time. The Running Book is his brand new one that's out in October. Robert McFarlane's The Wild Places, because I'm going to be going somewhere that has wild places. And after I read his recent Underland, I went out and bought a whole bunch of other things belonging to him. Helen Cullen's second one, The Truth Must Dazzle Gradually, which again I've been holding off for holiday purposes, and it's a beautiful, beautiful brand new version of it. And Sayaka Murata's Earthlings, if you read Convenience Store Girl, which I did and liked it very much. Liz has already read this, and the noises coming from immediately next to me in the bed at night were along the lines of, what? So immediately, it's the sort of thing that I'm going to be fascinated by now. Like, as to what I managed to get to, we'll tell you a bit more about that when I get back in September. Just finished picking the books for the Eason must-reads for autumn as well. I know Sinead is picking hers as well, and I've picked mine. There'll be more details about that towards the end of September, but they're picked, and they're 4 books, and they're extraordinary. I don't think there's anything else I need to do shy of our usual piece of business that we finish up on, which is Karina, the houseplant. Karina, our houseplant, always, since the very beginning of this series, given that she was the first person I interviewed for a test interview, she chooses a book every week. I think she has people with her, I'm not sure. Hello, Karina, how are you? How are you feeling tonight? Is all well? Good. And George is making an appearance as well. Oh, right. Hello, George. Hi, how are you? You may or may not have seen our 2 brand new dogs, George and TJ. TJ is obviously somewhere else. They are starting their own podcast called Rough Books, which is going to be coming to a podcast nowhere near you soon at any point in history, because that's just another thing. Karina, thank you for your service over the last 37 episodes. Sorry, you're reading Keelan Hughes' wonderful The Wild Laughter as well, I should point out, which has only been out in the last few days, but you might have seen there's reviews a go-go in a lot of major newspapers saying how wonderful it is, and we've been doing that here for a while as well. George, can you hear my voice? Is that it? George. Hello, George. No, never mind. It's always worth a go. And that is it temporarily from me for now, ahead of our main guest of the evening. I've been trying to arrange this for a little while, and I'm kind of thrilled that it's happened in the last part of the series and as our final episode, and immediately before we end up finishing up for the 4 weeks, and on the night of our anniversary as well, because we've kind of known each other a little bit on social media for a while, and he was very kind and gracious and agreed to come on and do this tonight. He has a paperback edition of his most recent book, Sweet Sorrow, coming out over the course of a couple of weeks, but you'll know him from us, you'll know him from Starter for 10, you will know him from screenwriting the Patrick Melrose TV series. David Nicholls, how are you, sir?
Hello. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Tell me a little bit about where you are.
I'm at home. Everyone's having dinner next door. I usually cook supper, and I'm having a night off. I'm very excited to not have to do the cooking and to be here instead. So it's a pleasure to be here. And this is my little scruffy office.
Yeah, that's always the second question is, have you just, made that place, look as if it's your office, or is this where all the work gets done?
I actually usually leave the house to write because then I can concentrate. But I haven't been able to do that since March. I've been here sort of homeschooling and doing the housework, and I haven't really written anything at all for 6 months. So every now and then I come and hide in here, but I haven't got much done, I'm afraid. And if you could see, the bit you can see is fine, but the stuff on the floor, it's really shocking. It's a very unpleasant environment.
And I suppose for every one of the other 36 authors that I've talked to in the series so far, there have been differing versions of answers. You're perhaps the only one that I've spoken to who said that you haven't actually really written anything for the last 6 months. What's that like as somebody who does this all the time?
It's quite unnerving. I don't like it. I mean, I was going to have some time off this year, and I had a couple of screenwriting projects that I was going to do, but I was also going to think about writing new fiction. And I thought I was going to write something contemporary, and I don't know what contemporary is anymore. You know, I don't know what the world is. The kind of stories that I had in mind don't really fit, and so I've been obliged to kind of let the dust settle. And also, as I said, you know, I like to write in isolation in an empty house, and I'm very involved in the whole business of keeping the kids engaged and keeping them fed. And I've been completely consumed by domesticity and haven't really found the time to think. So I've instead of feeling guilty, I've put it all to one side till September, and I will come back in September and concentrate. But it's just been impossible. Sadly, I thought, well, maybe I'll read, you know, Anna Karenina or something. I'll just read, fill all those gaps in. But I've been a little bit distracted and I haven't been able to concentrate either. So it's been slightly useless 6 months, but I'm not beating myself up about it.
I know of at least one author who we spoke to on the series, hello, Anne Griffin, if you're watching tonight, who took to going outside and writing in her car for a few hours because that was the only time she could get away from domesticity, as you said.
Yeah, it is very hard. And also, but I've also not wanted to resent it. You know, it's terrible if you start snapping at people and blaming them for circumstances. So I'm resigned to it now. But also, because I've been working on screenplays. The schedule for a screenplay is much more fluid than the publishing schedule for a novel. So and also, no one can make anything,
Mm.
so it's fine. I had very, very, very busy couple of years last year, and the year before were very intense. Lots of deadlines, lots of stress. So it's not the holiday I wanted, but it's not a disaster that it's been quiet.
One of the things that I have noticed you doing from following you on social media and on Twitter in particular is you've given up an enormous amount of time over the course of this to shine a spotlight on other people's books as they've been coming out. I mean, I could say why do that, but it's something that people do all the time. But why do it in the form that you've been doing it over the last while?
I just thought it was really hard for a writer who's been working for years and years to you know, it's very exciting to see your book in a shop. That never really goes away, that thrill. And to work for years and years, especially if you're a debut writer and not be able to get into a shop seemed particularly harsh and difficult. And so I don't have a huge Twitter following, but it seemed like a good use of the following I had to have a little celebration. So every Thursday I try and gather together as many of the new books being published that week as I can and just give them a shout out. And for me, it's been a good use of the time, and I've been in touch with brilliant writers, brilliant, exciting new writers. It's affected my own reading, and I've got a kind of insight into the incredible breadth of the books that are out there. So I think it must be very, very hard to miss out on your party, to miss out on your celebration, to miss out on the experience of going out and meeting people at festivals and launches. And it was a very small attempt to provide some consolation. But as I said, you know, if I had a million followers, it would probably be more effective. As it is, it's just a sort of token of my not sympathy, but encouragement, I suppose. I think a lot of books that seem to have got a little lost in the chaos of the last 6 months will find their readership, will find their audience when they come out in paperback or further down the line. But it must be hard. It must be really tough. I myself, you know, I'm a very, very lucky. This isn't a complaint. I'm very lucky, but I had to cancel an American tour that I was looking forward to very much, and Sweet Sorrow has sort of flopped all over Europe. I've been sat here watching it disappear in country after country, and as I said, you know, I'm relatively very lucky. If I was a debut author, I'd feel much more disconsolate, I think.
Is the timing then now perhaps of the paperback edition something that you're quite looking forward to, in that it does give it that second lease of life? It does give it the opportunity for people to maybe find it if they didn't find it beforehand.
I think so, yes. We did push it back 6 weeks, and in America, where it was meant to be coming out in March, I think we pushed it back quite a long way. But again, there's no real sense of the thing I really miss is the readings, the events, the going into bookshops, the meeting the readers, doing festivals, all of that stuff. I loved it. I didn't realize quite how much I loved it, how important it was to me, until I stopped doing it. And I think even though the mathematics of it is that you don't necessarily sell a huge number of books, you do have this reassurance that the book is being read and you can talk about it and you can have that exchange of ideas. And I've missed that a lot. And social media has provided a certain degree of an alternative, but it's not quite the same. And I can't wait to get out there again.
Yeah, I think even I've done 37 of these over the space of the last whatever kind of maybe 4 months, which is probably as many public interviews as I do in a year, in a year and a half. But they're not the same. It's just that you're missing the whites of people's eyes. You're missing getting to meet people afterwards. You're missing all that. Explain to me, Ben, maybe just if you can very briefly for those people who haven't read Sweet Sorrow as of yet. Tell us a little bit about the book and what it's about.
Yes, Sweet Sorrow is a classic summer coming of age love story. It's about a kid called Charlie who has screwed up his exams. He doesn't know what he's going to do with his life, and summer is stretching ahead of him and beyond. And he's a little scared. His family are breaking up. His parents are getting divorced. And summer is suddenly this monolithic desert that he can't, monolithic desert, terrible piece of writing, is this great wasteland that's better, stretching ahead of him. And he doesn't know what to do. And he stumbles one day on a girl, Fran, who he likes very much, and then discovers to his horror that she's in an amateur production of Romeo and Juliet for the whole of the summer. And the only way he can see her is to join the company. So even though he hates theatre, he hates Shakespeare, he hates the idea of the whole business of performance, he joins the company and falls in love. And it's an ensemble, romantic, bittersweet coming-of-age story set in the summer of 1997. It's told from the point of view of Charlie now, looking back on this one particular summer that changed his life in a way that's unexpected. It has a sort of framing device. You don't really find out where Charlie is now until the end of the book, but then you realize how the people he met that summer affected his life.
And it has a gorgeous new cover as well, which always helps whenever you get a chance like that with a book.
Yeah, it's a very difficult thing. Often where writers aren't really designers, are rarely equipped to talk about the aesthetics of their cover, and yet they know what they want. And it's a very vexed subject for a lot of authors. But I love the paperback cover. I love the hardback cover too. But this is a more this is illustrations are sometimes difficult for writers too, because they fix an impression on the reader before the readers even open the book. And so a lot of writers don't like photographs or don't like faces, but I think this cover is just right. It just pitches it absolutely spot on.
Before we get into what is allegedly the business of this evening, which is you showing us some books that you think we should be reading, I did always say that if we ever got to have a conversation, although I'd imagine that in a room full of people, that I would want to talk to you just very briefly about the Patrick Melrose books and about the adaptations that you did for those. Because as far as I'm concerned, it's one of the TV series that I've enjoyed most in the last few years. And you're a huge part of that. But is it strange as an author yourself and not, I suppose, a screenwriter by trade, to be asked to adapt somebody else's words and turn them into TV? What was that like? How did that process come about?
Well, I had to audition for it, and at the point I'd auditioned it, I sort of went for the meeting with the producers. I just published one day, which was about as far away from the tone and the subject matter of Patrick Melrose as you can get. But I used to work in bookshops, and I was working in the Waterstones in Notting Hill in 1993 when the first book came out, when Nevermind came out, and I read it and I was blown away by it. And at that stage, I had no idea that I'd ever end up being a writer. But I read the novels as they came out, one after another. And once I began screenwriting, that became my dream project. So I had to go in and say, well, I would change this and I'd move these things around and I'd draw out these qualities of the book and I'd perhaps combine these characters and I'd have 4 90-minute episodes. And I did my pitch and then went for a meeting with Edward St. Auburn, who is a writer who I revere, really. And someone who I was quite frightened to meet because his persona, the persona of Patrick Melrose, rather, is quite intimidating, and there are autobiographical elements in the novel. So I had a very nervous but ultimately very pleasant lunch with Teddy, and gave my pitch and got the job. But that was just the beginning of 6 years of rewriting and restructuring and moving from channel to channel, from Channel 4 to BBC One to Sky to 90-minute episodes, to hour-long episodes, to episodes with voiceover, to episodes without voiceover, just endless permutations.
Mm.
It was a very long project, but it was sort of my dream project as well. And ultimately, I think to a very large degree, because of the actors we had, and the director, brilliant director called Edward Berger, it worked out very well. And I'm very proud of it, even though it's nothing like my own original writing. Screenwriting is a sort of craft. You move things around. A lot of it is editorial. It's very collaborative. It's about putting certain things in certain places, and for that reason, it tends not to come from deep inside you in quite the same way. It's so collaborative. You have to take on board other people's input, and it's a very different business to writing fiction, which to me is much more expressive. You have much more control. It's much more personal, but something that I really, really love doing, and I hope I can always do both.
I'm going to just briefly, before we get to this, we do have questions. Nuala, hello Nuala, who says, hello David, loved Starter for 10 and 1 Day. A question I've always wanted to ask you is, can you tell us a little bit about the amount or level of research that you have to put in as a writer?
Well, that's very interesting. I'm a lousy researcher. I've never really researched anything. The novel, and the danger with that is that you end up just writing your diary. You just draw on your own life. And with Starter for 10, certainly there was a lot of my own experience there. Same with The Understudy, my second book, which is about being a failed actor, which is how I spent my 20s. And with 1 Day, it's not autobiographical, but the jobs that Emma has in the terrible restaurant and the educational theatre company and all of that was all the stuff I'd done. And by the time I got to my fourth book, I thought, you really have to go outside things your own world, things you've experienced. And so I did quite a lot of research on science. The main character in Us, I thought, I've got to stop writing about actors and writers and students. And so I wanted to write about science. And I did quite a lot of research into biochemistry. I met a lot of scientists, and I did that novel takes place all over Europe. So I also did a lot, either went to or did the relevant map research and Google Maps, Street View on Google Maps. I did all of that stuff. So that's the first book that I researched heavily. Sometimes in television. The other thing I did, which I'd never really done before, is even though it's a comic book, it has certain dark elements into it that I felt were so outside my range of experience that I ought to talk to other people. And I contacted people through bereavement charities and had a lot of fascinating and very affecting conversations with them. So sometimes it's not just about factual research. Sometimes it's about a kind of emotional digging and empathy, hopefully. And that isn't something I've done before. Sweet Sorrow, though, the only research I really did was I watched a lot of productions of Romeo and Juliet, and I talked to actors, and I read the play over and over. But apart from that, I tended not to do something that I want to explore in the future.
Okay, thank you, Nuala, for that. Books. Okay, let's see what you've chosen first.
Yeah.
I know you've got 3 big ones, and then you've got a few other ones you want to rattle through as well. So, okay, let's get started. What are you recommending?
And I'm not sure. Well, the first one, I wanted to recommend Keelan Hughes' The Wild Laughter, which I read a couple of weeks ago and thought was really wonderful and sort of wild and raucous and with an incredible voice, incredibly consistent voice, and full of great comedy and then huge pathos. And I really, really love that book, and I'm pleased it's getting attention. A book that's maybe not so well known that I love. I wanted to write talk not necessarily about my favorite books, but maybe books that people hadn't read or weren't so well known. This is Mrs. Bridge by Evan S. Connell. It's part of a pair of novels, Mrs. Bridge and Mr. Bridge.
Okay.
And they're told that it's the story of a marriage told from 2 different points of view. Little vignettes, little everyday scenes, domestic scenes, sometimes funny, sometimes painful, about the business of a long relationship. This book was a big influence on us. It's about suburban life, domestic life. It's set in the Midwest in the, I think the 1950s. and it's brilliant. It's a classic, I think, very underrated. It was made into a film called Mr. and Mrs. Bridge with Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward,
Hmm.
which I've never seen, but the books I absolutely love and highly recommend. They're brilliant, a brilliant breakdown and analysis, a comic, tragic analysis of the minutiae of everyday family life. And I'm very passionate about this book in particular, Mrs. Bridge in particular.
Is there an element of that because you love the books and you're so passionate about them? Is that why you've never watched the Paul Newman film?
Partly, I don't mind if I mean, I've done a lot of adaptation, and I think there's no such thing as true fidelity, and I'd be very happy for that. I wouldn't shake my fist if it didn't contain every scene in the book. Also, the difficulty you'd have as a dramatist with this is that it's about, in a way, it's a brilliantly entertaining book, but it's about banality. It's about nothing really happening, and that's a very hard thing to dramatize. So I think I'd be forgiving, but I get very jealous if someone adapts a book that I love. I mean, I get really furious and bad-tempered, and so it's a certain amount of self-preservation
Okay.
involved in that. Yeah.
Best not to then. Okay, that's fantastic. That's by Evan S.
Donald,
Evan S. Donnell. Fantastic.
Mrs. Bridge. I think it's in a Penguin Classic, which is where it belongs because
Super.
it's a great, great book.
Okay, what's
Um,
next?
just thematically, I'll talk about this one briefly because it is quite well known, but this is Hangover Square by Patrick Hamilton. Just because we were talking about adaptation, sometimes you read a book and you think, well, this is wonderful, but it's impossible. And this is an impossible book because of the point of view. I could go into more detail, but I become very boring. But it's a brilliant slice of 1930s Grand Guignol about a character, George, who has an infatuation with a sort of dissolute actress. He's completely in love with her, and he doesn't quite realize that he's being exploited by her and a group of her friends. And it has a wonderful atmosphere of 1930s Earl's Court, seedy bars, backstage at the theatre. It's a really grubby, seedy, cynical book, but it has this wonderful central character, and it's a great thriller. It has a couple of murders in that are really, really terrific. One with a golf and a brilliant premise because George is a sort of Jekyll and Hyde character. He has these moments where he becomes murderous and no one around him realizes. And it's a wonderful book, an underrated uh, slice of mid 20th century Gothic.
And weirdly, immediately when you gave me the title Hangover Square and when you suggested it was the 1930s, you immediately start to think about either Los Angeles or New York. That it's set in London
Yeah.
is interesting in and of itself.
Yeah, it has this wonderful he's not wonderful, he's vile, but a kind of black shed. It's about the rise of fascism and this fascistic element in London subculture at that time. And it's a very, very compelling, darkly comic book that I love and have read many times. And always try to work out, could you do this? And I don't think you can.
Fantastic.
I don't want to put, I'll talk about this very briefly because I don't want to give you any spoilers, but Strange Flowers by Donald Ryan, which I know you're taking.
No spoilers would be lovely, please.
Donald Ryan is one of my favorite contemporary writers, and I read everything he writes, and I really love him. I think his books are hugely affecting. This one is lovely. It's and again, different every time. This one is almost a kind of a Bible story. It has a very particular tone. Wonderful, simple language, and it's a family saga that covers a huge amount of time. But as you can see, it's not a huge book. It's a very economically written, beautifully written book. And I will always read anything that Donald Ryan writes. I think he's definitely a very, very fine living writer. And John Cheever is someone who I love, and I wonder how well known John Cheever is now. These short stories have been very influential for me. Again, they're about everyday life, white collar life, lives cracking up. They're often about the kind of the rage and madness and alcoholism and lust that lies behind seemingly respectable lives. And I love these stories, in particular one called Goodbye, My Brother, which isn't the most famous, but is a heartbreaker and a novel, a short story that I've drawn on a great deal and which always affects me. So if you've never read any John Cheever, I would definitely read the stories more than the novels. So the novels are.
And is that just called, is that just the best of John Cheever?
This is the complete stories,
It's
but you
complete
could
stories.
also get a collected stories
Great.
and whiz through them. They're great.
Okay.
They're sort of The Swimmer is his most famous, but I don't think his
Right.
best book, but the one that everyone knows, and um, they're wonderful. I'll talk about this one very briefly. Helen Garner, The Spare Room. Again, a brilliantly slim book. A darkly funny, painful, touching book. I've just seen Anna Enright has a quote on the back. My favorite discovery of the year. Helen Garner has a voice of great honesty and energy. It's about two lifelong friends, one of whom becomes very ill with cancer, and she goes to live with her friend, who sets out to do the right thing and to be the best possible friend, and things start to go wrong. And it's incredibly frank and honest about friendship. Very sad, very funny, not cynical, but neither is it sentimental. And I love Helen Garner. She's a great writer of nonfiction and fiction. She only three novels, but they're all great. And this is, I think, my favorite of the three novels. You could read it in 2 hours and be really blown away by it. So I love Helen Garner, and this is a fine, fine book.
And I don't know whether for me it's become a kind of post-lockdown thing. I've become a great enthusiast for brevity in novels. If somebody can say something in 220 pages, that's fantastic, or even slightly shorter.
When lockdown began, I thought, okay, I'm going to read D.H. Lawrence. I'm going to read The Rainbow. And I started, and the first day I read 100 pages, and the second day I read 50 pages, and the third day I read 20 pages.
Yeah.
And then I gave up on the fourth day because I just couldn't find the headspace.
My wife persevered through Moby Dick. And she started, and then I think more to bloody mindedness than anything else, because I don't think she ultimately enjoyed the long descriptions of whaling. She made it all the way through Moby Dick at the very beginning of this, and it was almost the breaking of her, I think.
I love Moby Dick. I read it in my 20s. I don't know if I can read it now, but I love the descriptions of whaling. I loved all of that encyclopedic stuff. But you're right, it doesn't have a great narrative drive.
Yeah.
Neither does my last book, which I'll talk about briefly, which is I thought I'd have a break from fiction. This is Conversations with Wilder. And if you're a film fan, this is, I think, one of the best books on film I've ever read. I love Billy Wilder. Again, novelists, I think, don't often talk about how much they can be influenced by filmmakers. And the kind of tragicomic tone, the bittersweet tone of a lot of Wilder's best work is very much something that I've aspired to. And this is Conversations between Cameron Crowe and Billy Wilder. He's a great raconteur, full of great stories and anecdotes, but also full of real insight about filmmaking and screenwriting, and my favorite book about cinema. So Conversations with Wilder, it might not be the perfect book to take away with you, but it's an amazing book on Golden Age Hollywood.
I think sometimes the best of those conversations as well come when you have one director interviewing another, particularly a director who presumably is passionate about his work.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, Cameron Crowe is a huge fan, but not uncritical, and Billy Wilder's very self-deprecating and confesses when the films don't quite work out. So it's bracingly honest, and yeah, it's a hugely entertaining.
I think with Billy Wilder, films not working out, they were fairly few and far between. I think, he has a higher strike rate than most.
There's a golden age in the middle, but the last 3 or 4, I think, were a real battle. I think The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, which is almost my favorite of his films, was a catastrophe. And after that, I think it just got harder and harder. But yeah, there's definitely a run in the middle that's pretty golden.
This has been genuinely lovely, and it's fantastic to get to talk to you face to face as opposed to through a keyboard. And I appreciate, as you said, you've got a lot going on in the house, and just hugely thank you for your time tonight, David. And hopefully, as I say to everybody, hopefully we get to do this in reality somewhere at some point down the line for whenever the next book may be, or the book after that.
I will be there. I'm never turning down an invitation ever again.
No, I don't think I am either. David Nicholls, thank you so much for talking to us tonight on Shelf Analysis. Cheers. Thank you. And that, sadly, That's the end of episode 37, and that's all we have for you for now. Having said that, if this has whet your appetite and this is the first one that you've seen, all of the episodes are available on YouTube. Just go and have a look. You may be on the YouTube channel right now. Who knows? Have a look at all of the previous episodes that run all the way back until March. There's some absolute corkers in there, and they're well worth your time. You'll find them all on RTE Culture as well, and you'll find them, of course, in the Ricochet Book Club. That's it from me for this for now anyway. We're back with another episode of Shelf Analysis. It's going to be on the first Wednesday in September, usual time, 8 o'clock. We have 3 of the 4 weeks of September booked up already with cracking authors who you will know well and who are all going to be guests on the program over the course of the month of September. Other than that, enjoy yourself for the next few weeks, and I'll see you then. And thanks so much for watching.